I never usually wear my hair down for videos because I always feel like I look like one of those little bobbleheads. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Joli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learned over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And in today's video, I'm going to be taking you through everything you need to know about the White Princess Philodendron, from basic care needs to the reasons that yours might not be doing as well as it could be. So yeah, let's get into it. So, Philodendron White Princess is native to the rainforests of South America, meaning that it's always going to do best in a tropical climate. So much of the time when houseplants start to go downhill, it's simply just because you're not kind of mimicking their natural environment well enough and you're just kind of guessing what they need instead of actually listening to them. Your houseplants need to be heard. When kept in the right conditions, these plants can be ridiculously fast growing. I got this one here about a year ago now as literally a tiny little leaf cutting. So as you can see, she's grown a hell of a lot in that time, despite a few little knocks and breakages here and there. A tragedy has just occurred. These plants are always going to do best in what's known as bright indirect light, which basically just means an area that receives lots of natural bright daylight but not too much direct sun itself, just because their leaves are quite sensitive and it can cause them to scorch and burn. The white variegated parts of the plant as well are particularly sensitive to this and lots of things, but bright direct sunlight is a definite no-no. So if you're going to keep them in an area that receives some sun, just make sure it's only kind of gentle morning and evening sun and not harsh midday sun. There's actually quite a few reasons that the white variegated parts of your plant might not always do as well as the green bits and might kind of start to brown and not look very nice. One of which is definitely a light imbalance. As I've already said, they scorch and burn really, really easily from too much direct sun, but also if your plant's not receiving enough light, on the flip side, if it's not receiving enough light, then basically what will start to happen is it will start to sacrifice the white variegated bits just because they can't absorb light and photosynthesize in the same way as the rest of the plant. So it will usually choose to let those bits go so that it can kind of conserve its energy and focus it on the green, healthy growth. Over the winter months when they're not receiving as much natural light and the hours of light they're receiving is a lot less, I tend to move my plants under grow lights just to kind of try and keep them as active as I possibly can. They can go into kind of a natural dormancy period over winter, which is totally normal and nothing to worry about. But for me, I just personally like to kind of try and keep them pumping out as much new growth as possible. So yeah, for this, grow lights are a really great shout. If they're not receiving enough light, the other thing that you might start to notice over time is that your plant becomes quite kind of stretched out and gangly as opposed to full, healthy, bushy, all the things that you want. So yeah, that's really, really important. The other thing is that the variegation can start to actually fade and kind of not be as prominent. Keeping the leaves clean as well is also super important, not just because it helps prevent things like pests, but also a buildup of dust and dirt essentially kind of acts as a shield and stops your plant being able to absorb all of the light it needs in order to photosynthesize and grow healthily. It's also just so much easier to monitor the state of your plant if it's not covered in a layer of dust. As I say, they're really fast growing plants and they do kind of tend to chase the light quite quickly. So just rotating their pots every few weeks or so that they can absorb equal amounts of light from all angles and not become too kind of leaning or lopsided is a really good idea. As you can see, I've got my one here on a moss pole. I've actually got a picture of her about 5 months ago, I think, that I will put in somewhere before I put her on a moss pole. And honestly, she has just shot up in the time that I've done it. They're climbing plants, so they really love having something to kind of attach themselves to and pull themselves up as they grow. The thing that I've really noticed as well since I've done it, I don't know if you can really tell, but the size of her leaves has just got absolutely huge, and I'm sure that's partly to do with it. So yeah, I would highly recommend, if you can, growing them on a moss pole. Bobblehead hair's going. It is literally so hot in here and I feel like my face is just getting redder by the second. The White Princess Philodendron really likes its soil to dry out slightly between waterings and is really, really susceptible to issues caused by overwatering, such as root rots. Whenever I can see that her soil's starting to dry out, I'll just stick my finger down in there and kind of feel to see how much moisture there is in the soil. If the top few inches of soil are completely dried out, then I will usually go ahead and water her again. It's really important to just monitor the soil because the rate that you need to water your plant will vary so so much depending on your house's environment. For example, if you've got a really hot house with loads of natural light and really high humidity, then it's going to dry out at a completely different rate to if you've got a really cold house, dark, low humidity, etc., if that makes sense. I know a lot of people like to use bottom watering for these plants, which is where you essentially just take your plant in its nursery pot and put it into a container of water instead of watering it conventionally from the top, and just let it feed from the roots up. I personally don't like doing this very often, and I actually made a video a while back on why I don't always think it's a particularly good idea, so I tend to just give her a thorough soak through as normal from the top. In that video that I just mentioned as well, I also talk about some of the ways that you can help to purify the water for some of your sensitive plants, so I will link that in the description box below if anyone's interested. As I bang on about in pretty much all of my plant care videos, underwatering is always better than overwatering. This is simply just because it's usually so much easier to save a plant that's been underwatered as opposed to overwatered. Overwatering can cause so many issues such as fungal issues, root rot, all those things that you don't want to have. I have spoken before about ways that you can treat root rot, so again, I will link that down below. Over the spring and summer months, your plant's going to be at its peak for growing, hence why it's often referred to as the growing season, meaning that adding some extra nutrients into your plant care routine is going to really help encourage and support new growth. I'll fertilise this plant pretty much every time I water during the growing season using a gentle diluted fertiliser. It might be really obvious to say as well, but just make sure you always read the instructions of how much to give your plants, because giving them too much, again, can cause issues. I've said this before as well, but if you've never fertilised your plant before, I would always just personally recommend starting with a little bit less than it says on the bottle and just gradually building it up over time, just so that you don't kind of send your plant into shock and it's suddenly like, whoa, all these nutrients, can't cope. I would, start with a little bit less, and assuming everything's good and your plant's responding well, then just kind of introduce a little bit more up to the amount that it says as time goes on. Also, if you've recently repotted your plant, assuming you've used a good quality soil, you probably won't need to fertilise them for a few months anyway, because they'll be getting all the nutrients they need from that. The soil mix that I like to use for these ones tends to be a combination of regular houseplant soil, coconut coir, perlite and orchid bark, although I'm really tempted to transfer her into pon at some point soon, just because I've done it recently for a few of my other philodendrons and it's literally working wonders for them. One of the other really common causes for browning leaves, particularly the white variegated parts, is lack of humidity. These are tropical plants and they're always going to do best in an environment that provides at least 60% humidity, but the more the better to keep them happier. If you can provide them kind of 70 or 80%, they will love you even more. I have humidifiers running pretty much all the time in my house just because I've got so many plants, but you can also use pebble trays, which basically just sit underneath your plants and as they evaporate, release humidity and keep your plants happy. The other great thing that you can do that is very cheap is just very cheap, it's free. Group lots of your plants together, and as they transpire and naturally produce humidity, they essentially act as a humidifier for each other. You've also just got to be quite careful if you've got radiators or fan heaters running, because this can take away so much of the natural humidity from the air. If I've got my radiator on downstairs, I'll often just put a cup of water on top of it so that when the radiator heats up, the moisture will evaporate and kind of restore a bit of the humidity to the environment for my plants. When it comes to temperature, these ones are always going to prefer it slightly warmer and don't always cope particularly well with lower drops. Ideally, you want to keep them at between 18 and 28 degrees Celsius and just make sure that that temperature is fairly consistent and steady and not constantly fluctuating up and down. They're also really sensitive to cold drafts, so keeping them in an area that receives good airflow is brilliant, but just make sure it's not too cold and breezy. These plants can also be propagated really easily to make new little baby plants. I made a video recently showing how to propagate Pink Princess Philodendron, and the process for the White Princess is pretty much exactly the same, so I will pop some clips in of that. I'm going to start off by lighting a candle, not just to set the mood for this video, but also because we're going to use it to seal the stems once we've cut them. Either pruning shears or scissors, but just make sure they're really clean. Basically just want to make sure that any part of the plant you're cutting has a node on it. That is so important, because they're the bits where your roots are going to grow from. Make sure it's got nodes on it, and I'm going to cut just here in the middle of the stem so that my next cutting also has nodes. And then we're going to use the wax from the candle just to seal the ends of the stems. You can also use like a hot frying pan or something like that. Some people sear the ends, and yeah, you can do that. I personally have always used wax, but there's no reason you couldn't do the other way. literally dip, obviously not getting the nodes on it, but just dip my end here into the wax. All of the nodes are still exposed, so they are good to go. And these bits here have been sealed, so they're very unlikely to rot. So as I say, with this one, I'm going to just propagate it in water. So it is literally as simple as, similarly to what I've done with this one here, just getting some water and popping your cutting into it. If anyone's got any questions or wants to know about something I didn't cover in this video, then feel free to drop me a comment down below and I will do my best to help. I really hope this video was useful. If it was, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next video.